Hi, I'm Christine Tully. I'm a senior writing coach with Defend and Publish, and this is episode 3 of our podcast series for January about resetting your writing kind of after the crazy 2020 year. So if you're just joining us, we did have 2 previous episodes. The first one focused on just getting a grip on what's happening with all of your writing projects. So I encourage you to go back to listen to that one. And the last episode, episode 2, talked about choosing one of the writing projects off of your list and making it your priority for the next 6 weeks. So what this third episode is going to cover is establishing a writing rhythm or getting a writing rhythm for that particular project. So one of the things I want to start with is the idea that a writing rhythm is not the same as a writing routine. I know it's January. A lot of us are trying to put new routines in place, like, for example, waking up a half hour earlier to get more done, or maybe going back to the gym, or, cooking at home 3 nights a week, or some kind of, routine like that. It's not even a writing routine in the way that I've described previously in the past episode. I talked about I think it was in episode 1, I talked about my writing routine and how I like to write in the library and I like to have my coffee and do that. A writing rhythm is a little bit different from that, because what I think about this is a method of getting engaged with your writing again, particularly after, maybe having months without doing any writing. It's more about the feeling, and there's some ways that you can get yourself going towards that feeling. So what we did in episode 2, or what we talked about in episode 2, was sorting through all the items for your priority project into just 2 groups. Tasks that require a high level of mental energy, and then tasks that don't. Another way to think about these would be tasks where you already know what you're going to do. You just need to sit down and do it. Tasks like that would be things like, maybe you need to check on a reference, or you need to reword a title, or maybe you need a better format for a table or something like that. They're sort of the easier, busy work tasks of writing. Tasks that require that high level or the high mental energy for writing are ones where you need some brain work. Like, for example, you really did not articulate your rationale for your project very well, or you've got a whole section where the organization is off. It's things that you really need to do some thinking. And sometimes those are the writing tasks that we avoid because they require this mental energy. And what I had, if you listen to episode 2, what I advised was, figuring out all the tasks that go with your project and just sorting them into those 2 categories. We did provide on the Defend and Publish website under podcasts, you can see actually a chart or a grid to help you do that if you want to have maybe a paper piece to do that on. But the goal with that then, and what we're going to think about for this week with a writing rhythm, is to figure out how to deal with those high energy projects and high mental energy projects and low mental energy type projects. So here's one of the things that I advised last week. I mentioned that I think if you're getting back into your writing, you really should be shooting for 8 to 10 hours a week. I realize that might be very difficult to come by, and that could be scrapped together with like 20 minutes here and 30 minutes here. But that's something that hopefully you're ideally shooting for, to really get some traction on your project. Of that time, then let's say you can manage 8 hours. You can do 8 hours a week, here and there through different things. The next step would be, for getting your writing rhythm, is to think about, in that 8 hours, if you can get 4 of those hours for those high mental load type things. So those bigger writing tasks that take more thinking time on your behalf, and you probably need focused, quieter writing time, or at least time that you're not going to be disturbed by other obligations. So I know I gave the example in the previous podcast that if I've got 20 minutes before I have to go pick up a kid from school and I've got a phone call, that 20 minutes is probably not the great time for me to get some high mental work done. But I could knock off a couple of smaller, maybe low mental energy type things. Like, even if it's something like, I read 1 paragraph just to see if I could tweak it a little bit and make it sound a little bit more clear, or I could work in some more transitional expressions or something like that. So the next step would really be to think about, with your 8 hours or 10 hours, where are half of those hours going to go in my week that I could get that focused time? So I know we talked in the very first episode about there's a lot of stuff about getting up before everybody else and getting your writing done and knocking it out before it can get away from you. And I have done that because sometimes that is the only time that I'm alone and it's quiet and I can get some writing done. It's not my favorite thing to do. I will do it if I have to. And that might be you right now if you're homeschooling or you've got, elder care or something else happening. But let's say you can find 4 hours that are pretty decent. They're blocks, 4 hours where you're probably not going to get interrupted. And they're kind of like the most ideal time that you've got right now. What I'd like you to think about then is using those 4 hours, so that half of your writing time for the week, for those higher level things. Because sometimes the tendency with getting a writing rhythm is that you never really get a rhythm at all. And that's because you're only working through either the lower tasks that you know what to do. And it's not that those tasks don't need to be done, they do, but they're not really moving the bus forward. It's the higher mental things that really make your project come together for you. So let me give you some examples of what might happen in the differences in those writing hours, and this might help. One of the things that I do on my own Twitter account, and we'll have a link in the show notes to this, but I have a hashtag that says what faculty writing looks like, because I've really made it a commitment of mine. And this is part of my work with Defend and Publish to expose what it really takes to get this writing done. And so I have a lot of the captures of that high level thinking work that I'm doing in those sessions that maybe will give you some ideas about what you can do in yours. So for example, one of the things I've made a promise to myself long ago is sort of no matter what, I always get some writing done on Mondays. I know there's been a lot of literature out there about just getting stuff done. Like if you don't go to the gym on Monday, you're not going the rest of the week, things like that. But for me, I like to have that momentum of Monday and starting off my week that way, because I want that project in my brain for the week. So I don't want to be like, well, I'll get to that on Wednesday after I do my teaching or my service or my other things. It just, for me, it doesn't work that way, because I do think kind of in a traditional academic, Monday to Friday work week. That's just me. You might be more of like a Sunday person, like start of the week, I've got to do some writing today. But either way, one of the things that happens on that Monday is that I've mentioned this in a previous episode and also in some other podcasts. I usually don't do a lot of scholarly writing on the weekend because I have children at home. It's just not conducive for me to do that. Everybody's underfoot. I've got, other family things going on. So Monday, I've been away from my writing for at least 2 days and sometimes 3, like if I can't make even a Friday work. And so it's hard to get back into writing and figure out what it is I'm doing. So one way that I do that, but I still make sure I'm using some high level thinking time and not just doing, crossing off the smaller stuff, is that I'll think about the large scope of the project in a couple of different ways. And this is what I'm capturing, which you can actually see pictures of. I tried to really visualize it for you, which we'll have a link in the show notes for you. But one of the ways that I do that, for example, is I will get out a big whiteboard at the library and just get some markers and start drafting out. I might rewrite my argument. So I'm as though I'm like telling somebody, or I'm writing it on the board for like a presentation. I might re-outline a section or a chapter. I've done that a lot of times. When chapters are getting away from me, I don't outline what's actually in the chapter currently. I think about it on a whiteboard with a marker like, okay, this is my main argument. These are some of my other arguments. Here's kind of how I want to do them. And you'll see in many of these pictures, and I'll also include some of the pictures in the show notes, you can see where there's arrows, there's crossouts, and you'll even see sort of like flashes of that high level thinking, because I'll see when I do that, oh, there's like these 3 common things across, maybe a couple of prongs of this particular chapter. And then I have a new lens that I can kind of layer over on top, or a new organizational mechanism. So if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, you can check out a picture and you'll be able to see it right away, because I just basically did some brainstorming. And when I did that, I figured out, oh, I have all these great connections that I can make. So that's one way that I get into my Monday writing. Plus, for me, it's kind of fun because I don't start with sitting down at the keyboard, because a lot of us I know have sort of that like early anxiety to get back to doing it. I kind of like it because it's standing up, it's active. If you want to make it fun, get a bunch of different color markers, whatever floats your boat. But for me, that's a really good way to get in. Another thing that I will do to get into it is I will print out a draft of the last thing that I wrote, and I'll start with what I would call like a coffee and a reading scenario. I've mentioned I like to have my coffee in the library, like my, most important cup of the day. So I'll sit there and I'll actually like sit there with my chapter or my article or whatever it is I'm doing and just read through it. I'll do it like a pens down reading where I'm just refamiliarizing myself with what I did last time, what was written, especially for this larger book project that I'm working on. For example, I might start with a different chapter than the one I was working on like the Thursday or the Friday of the week before. I might pick a totally different one just to stay engaged with that chapter if that one also is not finished or I have to, do some more work on it. I kind of like that as a way to get into it because inevitably I cannot resist for too long not using a pen. So, because you're going to find something, say on like page 3 of that reading where you're like, oh, I totally did not say X, Y, Z. And that knows, then it has to go in there. So then I'll let myself, of course, pick up a pen, start doing some paper, some edits on a paper copy. And then the next thing I know, I can use those paper edits and just start entering them into the draft. So those are 2 ways that I often engage to get into my writing. Maybe those would be useful for you. Another one that I have used on occasion is I've actually read it out loud to myself, like I'm telling myself a story. I've done that to get started. A fourth way that's a kind of a higher level of engagement is I'll take one section and actually copy, paste it, and dump it into a Word document. And I'll just look at that section in isolation and really think about it. And what I try to do is pull out a section that I know is just not quite right, but I don't know why. So, either the wording's wrong, or I know I didn't, connect something to a previous theory, or I didn't explain a method very well. But all of those things are kind of high level engagements because they're really forcing you to think through the arguments in your writing. And I find for me, if I kind of get one of those high level engagements on a Monday, that really sets the tone for the whole week, because then I have an idea of what's going to happen next. I know where I need to go on a higher level, just not the, the lower energy type or the lower mental energy type tasks. So I do try to always hit a high level thing on a Monday if I can, but then, as with all academic weeks, some weeks are better than others. So I might know I've got a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Thursday where I'm not going to get interrupted. So I'll kind of reserve those higher level times for that. And then the lower mental energy things might come on days where maybe I only have like a 15-minute slice here and then a 30-minute slice here. So if you haven't listened to episode 2, I highly encourage you to go back and kind of look at that and really think about your writing project. If it's your priority, you want to get as much done as possible in the next 6 weeks. What are those things? So I always think of the higher level things as either problems that you have not really worked out and you've got to figure out. They're often related to a thesis or an argument. Sometimes it's a focus problem where you're not totally sure what your focus is for the writing. Sometimes it's organizational, where you've just got stuff all over the place and you've got to figure out how it all hangs together. Those are the types of things that really go into those higher level things. Stuff that is lower energy or maybe lower mental energy can be those easy tasks like creating a table or changing a reference, but they also can be development. So that might seem like development of your writing might be a higher level thing, and it can be, but the way that I think of it in a lower, like kind of in a lower task, like something I know what to do when I sit down to do it, or something that doesn't take as much mental focus, is that another thing that I'll do, and often on, a Monday or Tuesday early in the week, I will look at a piece of writing and I'll look where I used a quote. And then the next thing I'll do is look at the sentence right after it. And I'll say, did I actually figure out how the source is working within my own writing? Did I interpret how the source is being used? Did I make some kind of commentary or connection between that source and what's happening in my own project? And it forces me to just be a little bit more clear about what my sources are doing in my project. So that's really a good thing for graduate students out there. If you're writing, your literature review chapter, or you're, writing an article or something like that. This is often a technique that takes a little while to hone, like how you're going to engage with your sources. It's a skill we're often teaching students, but I find that even, seasoned academics, a lot of times we don't do such a great job of it either, where we're really thinking about how that art or that source support is fitting into our own project. And sometimes it means you do need to do a little bit more development there, where you've got to write a sentence maybe before the quote or after, or some other connection to hook it together. So, I really encourage you to think about your writing times in that way. And then coming back to the whole theme of this episode about the rhythm, what ultimately has happened for me, kind of thinking about it in that way, is that when I go to my writing sessions, and we'll kind of get into what those are, or maybe what they look like for you next week, in more detail about space and, all those other things. But when I go to a writing session, for example, on Monday, I might know, okay, I've got between 9 and 11 to do some writing. And I go, to my favorite library spot, or if I have to work from home, I'm working from home to do it. But one of the things I know what I'm doing when I'm getting there, because I know I'm going to start with some high level thing to engage with the writing. So I mentioned the whiteboards or isolating a paragraph. I usually choose one of those things to go right out of the gate. And because I'm not trying to actively generate new content that very second, I'm just trying to engage with the content I have and understand it better. That seems to be a way to get a writing rhythm going, because what does happen from there then is that's how the new content is generated, because it gives me an idea like, oh, I have a section I haven't finished over here. Here's an idea that might carry through from what I just figured out organizationally. Or I know I didn't engage in a lower, if we're talking about a lower energy thing, I know I engage with that source. I need to maybe say a little bit more about that source. And then maybe you'll discover, oh, but I could come back to that source actually down here in this other part of my article. So the rhythm is more about how you're getting your brain to think through your writing and generate new writing, revise your writing. It's all part of how you're engaging. So much of the writing advice out there, and this is why I think, these podcasts and some of the things that Defend and Publish is doing differently with coaching and some of the things that we offer. One of the things I would argue is a little bit different is not trying to give you just tricks like, well, go sit down and go do a routine and everybody should be writing these hours. You got to know what you're doing when you get there. So as much as possible, I'll try to share with you some strategies about what you can actually do when you get there. And not everything is going to work for everybody. If you're not a big whiteboard person, that's not going to work for you. I know in one of our webinars, one of our coaches, Robin, has mentioned how she likes to do some journaling, some free writing or journaling to start. Maybe that's a good way to go. Other people, maybe you want to sort of trick yourself into writing and don't even write at all is the very first thing. Maybe you'll have a conversation with a colleague every Monday. You guys, meet in the morning to just touch base for a half hour. You guys talk through your writing projects and what you did the week before. Sometimes that's enough to get a trigger of a writing rhythm going. It is part of a schedule, so I don't want to dismiss the idea of having, I mentioned having 8 to 10 hours. You still want to make sure you're logging the time, but I think it's a little bit less about like every day I go to my writing session at 2 p.m. and I always do these same things. I would argue, yes, I have some of those rituals, built into my writing rhythms, but once you actually get going and you know what it is you're actually doing with the writing, and you can kind of choose, like, is this a time where I can do some mental, higher level mental things or not? That helps you make some decisions about what it is you're going to do. And I think that's a good way to avoid paralysis, where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing when I'm sitting down in this writing session, or that dread of just sitting there being blocked or feeling like you wasted your time. If you've got those tasks sorted into those two categories, you might find that I thought this was going to be a high level mental kind of a day, but honestly, I don't have the manpower for it. This horrible thing just happened to be in class, or I've got this family issue. Then, okay, shift over to the other side, work on the stuff that doesn't require you to do quite as much. You know what it is that you need to do. So hopefully this advice has been helpful, and you will be tuning in to check out our last episode for January that will be focusing on kind of tying all these things together. But certainly I will do some commenting on, writing spaces and some other things that are just things to get you in the habit if you're going to set new writing resolutions for this year or a writing reset after 2020. So happy writing. Thanks.